Hello, dear viewer. Thank you for joining me once again, where people continue to be wrong on interwebs, don't they? This is Jay Feldman, who's a friend of Mike Fave, i.e. another one of these bioenergetics individuals who suffer from both Dunning Kruger very, very seriously, i.e. a destitution of comprehension so severe that they're unable to see their own destitution of comprehension. The whole idea around bioenergetics is farcical, nonsensical, fallacious and ridiculous. It's based on a reductionist view of how the energetics of cellular function occur, etc. Anyway, they're going to point to all of those things quite squarely in this chat, I would imagine. It's quite long, so it might take me quite some time to get through it, and perhaps I'll break it down into a series of videos depending on how this goes. But anyway, let's hear from these two absolute imbeciles, these two children in short pants, neither of whom is remotely qualified to actually profess on any aspect of metabolism or energetics whatsoever. These are some boys with opinions. Let's hear them, though, and put them right where they're wrong.
You've probably heard that you shouldn't eat carbs and fats together due to the Randle Cycle.
Yes, that's correct. You should not.
But is that really true?
Yes, it is. That's why I've said it many, many times.
And what does the Randle Cycle actually tell us?
Well, it depends on whether you have the comprehension to actually view the thing holistically and correctly, which you don't.
We'll be answering these questions in today's episode of...
No, you won't. You'll be giving us your opinions.
The Energy Balance Podcast.
Opinions being just like assholes, Jay, and that almost everybody's got one, and it's almost certainly full of shit.
A podcast where we explore health and nutrition from the bioenergetic view and teach you how to maximize your cellular energy.
No, the first bit was true. Viewing it from a certain angle, okay, fine. There's nothing in bioenergetics that will teach you to maximize anything of any utility whatsoever. It's fallacious, ridiculous nonsense from start to finish, all of it.
To maximize your health.
Nonsense.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about how the Randle Cycle actually works.
No, you won't. You'll get it wrong.
We'll discuss whether eating carbs and fats in the same meal actually causes weight gain and...
Who said it does?
Insulin resistance. We'll go...
Insulin resistance is a construct, Jay. There is no such thing as an insulin resistance meter. You can't... It's not a physiological thing. It's a construct. It's an idea put together. It's an idea that is fallaciously, ridiculously referred to by... It's almost ubiquitous. It's not just you guys that are doing it. It doesn't make it right, though. We'll cover that as and when we need to.
Over the efficiency of using fats as a fuel versus carbohydrates.
Efficiency, you say? That's interesting. We'll cover that as and when we need to as well.
As well as how stress impacts fuel usage in the mitochondria.
What kind of stress are you talking about there, Jay?
And how to determine the optimal amount of carbs and fats in your diet.
Well, that's easy, but we'll cover that when we need to as well.
As always, to check out the show notes where I'll link to the studies, articles, and anything else that we reference throughout today's episode.
Referencing things doesn't mean that you actually have any facts behind you, Jay, at all, or any comprehension.
You can head over to jayfeldmanwellness.com/podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother with that.
And with that, let's get started. All right, so let's talk about the Randle Cycle.
Yes, let's.
It's
Why is that funny, Mike Fave? Apparently that's absolutely hilarious to mention the Randle Cycle. Goodness gracious.
It's an interesting set of mechanisms that, for one reason or another, has garnered a ton of attention.
That's down to me, Jay. That's why it's garnered a whole bunch of attention, because I've brought it to the attention of people at large in recent times. It was originally proposed by Sir Philip Randle. Of course, he didn't call it the Randle Cycle. He called it the glycerol fatty acid cycle for some reason, especially considering it's not really a cycle, but that's for another day. Yeah, but the resurgence of the thing and its interest in the public sphere in recent times is entirely down to me bringing it forward once again.
Health sphere, you have a lot of different pathways and some that do gain some popularity. But when it comes to carbon fat utilization, for one reason or another, the Randle Cycle is a popular one to discuss. And with that, there's a lot of misconceptions regarding...
Yes, most of them from you, Jay, and your little mate Mike here, who still apparently doesn't seem to appreciate that the bedpans are piling up and that's what he should go and do. And you should go and do whatever it is you're qualified for, Jay, because it certainly isn't talking about energetics of cell function or biology or any of that sort of stuff.
The Randle Cycle and misapplications. So because of that, we're going to do an episode here where we'll dig into the mechanisms in some detail. We'll go through some figures.
Yes, the mechanisms.
Explaining it. and kind of simplify it a little bit and explain.
Well, that's going to be the problem then, isn't it, Jay? As soon as you simplify something, it's called reductionism. It leads to the likelihood of errors occurring, therefore, in interpretation and application.
What it all means, but then we'll also take some time to explain what this actually means for you in terms of your diet and, whether you're considering separating carbs and fats, or you're considering, trying a low carb approach or a high carb, low fat approach due to Randle Cycle mechanisms, which are often cited for those kinds of things. So we'll be digging into all that, and we'll just start with a kind of broad overview of what the Randle Cycle is, and then we'll
this will be interesting.
Dig into each of those mechanisms. Before we do that, Mike, is there anything you want to mention here as far as the Randle Cycle in the health world? And then if you want, you can jump into the overview or wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, I think...
Yeah, see how Mike has to laugh after he claims to think. Nervous laugh, because everybody that's got more than 3 brain cells and can think, Mike, knows that you don't, and that the bedpans haven't been done yet.
This is our... Individually, we've both done many videos on the Randle Cycle.
It's funny how none of them, A, were very popular, or B, remotely correct in terms of what you've actually had to say about it.
You group them all together. And
together too. We've talked about it on tons of prior episodes.
Doesn't mean what you said was correct. I actually have a playlist on the Randle Cycle on my Fine channel if people want the actual correct interpretations of the thing.
But, not dedicating a whole episode to it.
Yeah, I think this is long overdue, because I think I've made episodes...
Now, what's long overdue, Mike, is the bedpans need doing. And you need to shut up, get your ridiculous fucking face off the YouTubes permanently, and take your mate Jay with you, and he can help you with the bedpans, perhaps. What you've got no business doing is pretending to know anything about the Randle Cycle or anything else, to be fair.
About it, then we talk about it on the podcast. Then we did a big expose on it on the Bioenergetic Helpline channel, which it's not there anymore.
I wonder why.
And now we're bringing the due diligence and we're putting it straight in energy balance. Every time I go through the Randle Cycle, I learn a new layer to it.
Right. So in other words, Mike, what you've just admitted to there straight out is that actually your level of understanding of the Randle Cycle, it's cursory at best, because every time you look at the thing, you learn something else. All right? So, ergo, you should not be making videos about something that you are not an expert in. Isn't that straightforward? I would have thought it was.
Or there's a new element that comes back to it, and I do appreciate going through it over and over again, because I do think it is helpful to understand. But I think the biggest piece here...
Well, it would be if you did, Michael, but you don't.
Here is it's helpful to understand in terms of why people are getting dysfunction or what's happening in dysfunctional metabolic states, not necessarily what's happening in an individual meal. And I think that's where one of the major things that we'll get into.
Right, but a whole bunch of individual meals, Michael, put together over a period of time lead to a pattern of disordered nutrition, which is associated quite clearly with a pattern of disordered metabolism, and the mechanism of it 99 times out of 100 is overactivation of the thing that we are parsimoniously referring to as the Randle Cycle. Okay?
The Randle Cycle is waxed in the low-carb communities to some extent as a reason why you can't have carbohydrates and fats together.
Well, you can on any one given meal, if that's what you're suggesting, Mike, or any one given day. Absolutely. You'll pay the price for it for a period of time, because the Randle Cycle will be activated for a period of time by doing that. Even after one meal, yes it will, immediately, pretty much. But if you only did that once in your life, or once a month, or once every 6 months, or whatever, depending on however adherent you choose to be on not activating your Randle Cycle, then fine. If you do it every meal, well, you've got a problem, haven't you? This is not hard to understand.
And then even in the new sugar diet trends or the higher carb trends, it's why you can only have carbs and you can't have fats.
Right. Well, you can, though. You can do anything you want to, including make videos that you're completely unqualified to make, Mike, while the bedpans pile up.
And I think it's important that we actually understand.
Important has a T in it. It's not important, it's important.
What the Randle cycle is saying in context, so we can dispel some of these components so people don't get weird dietary iterations where you only have carbs or you only have fats.
That's not weird. There's nothing weird about that whatsoever.
In general, or in certain meals or across the day, because there's benefits of actually having the macronutrients in a meal together.
No, there aren't. If you mean carbs and fats together, no.
And then we can also get into the perspective of where does the Randle cycle actually matter?
Right, what do you mean where does it matter? What does that mean, Michael?
Where does it make a difference to truly understand the Randle cycle?
Right, well, that doesn't clarify the point that you're trying to make there whatsoever. You still haven't answered the question. Where? What do you mean where?
And how that helps us solve?
I'll tell you where it matters. In every single cell of your body, that's where the Randle cycle matters. Okay?
Problems from a physiologic perspective, instead of taking it into this area where it doesn't really apply quite as much. So for me, it's an interesting topic, but I'm always thinking about it in the sense of dysfunction, not necessarily in meals. So I think that's the big piece here, and I think it's a good frame for us.
That's a completely vacuous, logic-lacking, non-framework that you're putting forward as some kind of framework there, Mike. There's nothing of any value or utility in there at all, whatsoever.
To jump in, because it's mostly talked about in the context of how do you set up your diet.
Well, the diet, Michael, is what you eat ongoingly over a period of time.
At least in the influencing types of spheres, social media. But in the research, the conversation is more of what's happening in the individual cell inside the mitochondria.
Right, so reductionism is what you're talking about, Michael. The very problem with your ridiculous, pustulous, rancid, excremental garbage that you're putting forward on an unsuspecting public who falsely believe that because you can talk about one or two isolated parts of the entire integrated metabolic system of a human being and that you hold a nursing degree, that qualifies you to be an expert in this, which it doesn't.
And inside these different disease states like type 2 diabetes, obesity, impaired glucose tolerance, stress situations, low carb dieting, etc.
You want to define some of those for us? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great framework.
No, it isn't. It's absolute rubbish.
And I think it's, with that in mind, we'll just jump into what the Randle cycle is. And
okay, then. This will be interesting.
That's actually something that's a little bit malleable. What
does that mean? We know what malleable means as a word, but what does it mean when you apply the term malleable to what is the Randle cycle, Jay? What the hell are you talking about? Do you speak English at all?
Very broad sense, the Randle cycle is a set of mechanisms that are at play that govern fuel utilization and competition, essentially. And what it's looking at is the different mechanisms that go on when you're utilizing one fuel and how those interfere with the utilization of other fuels and basically acts as a metabolic switch. So,
well, no, that's false. Completely false, Jay. Nonsense. That's not what the Randle cycle is at all. For a start, to describe it as a switch is completely inaccurate. It's a fader, if anything, not a switch. All right? Secondly, it's not really about competition whatsoever. It's about cross-inhibition, not competition. And actually, the Randle cycle ostensibly is an encapsulation and use with a purpose in mind that the metabolic pathways are designed by natural selection pressures in such a way as that we can encapsulate and use inertia as the determinant of ongoing fuel oxidation makeup. All right?
When a single cell or a single mitochondrion is using one fuel, there are certain mechanisms at play that prevent that same cell from utilizing other fuels.
That is false, Jay. That is not what the Randle cycle is. That is not how it works. Prevent is the wrong word. Switch is the wrong word. And using one fuel is the wrong word. because mitochondria use a mix of fuels, fats and carbohydrates, most of the time. So it's clear you don't understand the thing right from the get-go.
Or at least mitochondria. I mean, we'll get into the nuance there and all the details. But
that'd be nice.
But that's really what it's coming down to on a fundamental level.
No, it isn't, Jay. That's false.
But, this started out, Randle is the last name of the researcher who started describing this in the 1960s and talking about how when a cell was utilizing fatty acids, it interfered with glucose utilization. And on the flip side, when a cell was utilizing glucose, it interfered with fatty acid utilization.
It sounds a lot like inertia, doesn't it? Something that's doing something will continue to do that thing until a force powerful enough to cause it to do something else is applied. Your metabolic system has inertia. That's what's going on here.
And he cited a number of mechanisms and reasons as to why this occurs.
Right, so he mapped out the thing and proposed the specific machinery or mechanisms, if you like, Jay, that cause this encapsulation of inertia to be used in this way.
We're talking about those, but it's really expanded since then, right? There's been a lot of new research since that point in the last 60 years, and so there's been new mechanisms uncovered and extra layers that continue to kind of develop and add to the complexity of the view. And
yeah, but none of those things change the actual effect of the thing and why it is the thing exists, what it is designed by natural selection pressures to do.
Kind of further it along. So we'll be getting it.
Let's boil it down and make it short for people. It's designed, the Randle cycle, designed by natural selection pressures. The role of the thing is to protect your important cells from glycating damage that would occur if glucose were allowed to pour into cells according to their concentration gradient in the blood, irrespective of the energetic state of those cells. When cells do not require sugar for energy, those cells discourage sugar from entering, because it would pool in there and do damage. Instead, the sugar is held outside the cells in the blood. And so the sacrificial lambs become the endothelial cells of the vascular tree and the formed elements in the blood, which suffer the glycation damage instead. When you pour in contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates, especially if you do that in a mix with fats, even in one meal. Okay? Pretty straightforward. The endothelial cells and formed elements being able to be replaced much more rapidly, much more easily, with much less effort on the part of the body than the complex cells that would be destroyed by too much glucose. There it is in a nutshell. Pretty much. What's next?
To some of that as well. But yeah, on the basis, what this is telling you is that, and we're going to go through these mechanisms.
Mechanisms, good. I love mechanisms.
That you have an idea of what's going on here as the listener.
Well, if you want to listen to someone who has an idea of what's going on in the Randle cycle, you should listen probably to myself more than you should listen to these two boys, because neither one of them has the first clue of what's going on. They'll talk about things like the electron transport chain. They'll talk about things like FADH2 and NADH plus H plus, and they'll talk about reactive oxygen species, and they'll talk about efficiency, and they'll do anything but actually talk about what this thing is holistically, why it's there, what it's doing, and the effect with which it does it. It's incredible. It's mind-numbing, frankly. Luckily, you're listening to someone, yours truly, this bad bald man, who really does explicitly understand all of these little bits of mechanism very, very well, and how they work together, so I can correct these boys when they get it wrong. All right? This will be fun. Stick around.
But essentially what we're looking at is how, when a cell is utilizing fat, it prevents or reduces the utilization of glucose.
Well, which, Jay? Which is it? Because it's one of those statements is correct and one of them is not. The first one, prevents, is not correct. Okay?
And vice versa, when a cell is utilizing glucose, it decreases the utilization of fat.
Yeah, which makes sense and is obvious. Of course the cells do that.
And it's something that has various adaptive benefits as well that we'll talk about as to why you might want this to occur.
Right, well, I've just outlined them pretty much.
In certain contexts, so we'll get into that as well. But, I think as a starting place, we'll dig into fat utilization, what goes on there, and then how that interferes with glucose utilization. Is there anything you want to mention, Mike, before we jump into that?
I think the most important preface...
I'd like to mention that the bedpans are still piling up, and Michael is still not attending to the bedpans, which is what he should be doing. That and some more nursing-related activities, not coming online and being a social media influencer and pretending to know anything whatsoever about the Randle Cycle or anything else.
Here, to understand as we're going through this is happening at an individual cell.
In every cell. Because the machinery, for want of a better term, the mechanisms which cause the thing we're parsimoniously referring to as the Randle Cycle to occur, exist in every cell. So, of course, every cell has its own individual control fader as to what the mitochondria in that cell will be doing. And indeed, it might differ, where the sliders are, between different mitochondria in the same cell, depending on what that mitochondrion is receiving from the cell cytosol in terms of the signal as to what is in that cell cytosol.
So, and I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, you have hormonal overlay with insulin, glucagon, adrenaline, cortisol, etc. growth.
It's not overlay, because overlay implies control at that level. The control is not at that level on fuel utilization by mitochondria within cells. They make up their own minds, for want of a better term.
Hormone that will shift the body in mass in one direction or another. But even with that, the Randle cycle is still largely talking about what happens at one individual cell.
No, it's talking about what happens at the systemic level on the basis, Mike, of the balance of what all the individual cells are doing collectively. Because that has a systemic effect, you imbecile.
And this is really important because it's going to...
Or important. With a T. It's important, Michael.
Be the foundation.
But nothing you have to say is, except I'm going to go and do the bedpans now and shut up. When are we going to hear that?
For why what your meal breakdown isn't going to... like having carbs and fats in the same meal isn't necessarily going to cause an issue. And the other thing is...
It very likely will, though, Michael, when you understand what the thing is and how it works. It very, very likely will do exactly that. In one meal, yes, for a period of time. Still.
The overarching context for this as well is that...
if you string a bunch of those meals together on end for a period of time, then you will probably end up with more chronic metabolic dysfunction instead of the short-term metabolic dysfunction that will occur should you choose to pour a bunch of contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates down your neck, especially at the same time as pouring any amount of fats down your neck. Still.
At all times, in general, we are using both carbs and fats.
Yes.
Not only for energy purposes, but also for other purposes in the body, different metabolic processes, anabolic processes, etc.
Yes.
And you can see this with something like the respiratory quotient, which is basically...
which is something you clearly don't understand very well at all, Michael, as I covered in my video responding to your ridiculous, arrogant, nonsensical garbage just the other day.
A sliding scale of how... and it's a ratio in terms of the CO2 production.
No, it's not a ratio. It's a quotient. That's why it's called the respiratory quotient. Oh my God.
And oxygen consumption that basically lets us know, are we using more fats or using more carbs? And it slides.
It doesn't let you know that actually at all. It makes an inference around that, which is subject to a number of assumptions, some of which are correct and some of which are not.
It's based on what the composition of the diet is, because we are always using both. because
You've said that, remember, brain fog much?
you have different tissues using different substrate at different periods of time.
Or even at the same time.
Because the Randle cycle is just specifically talking about what is going on at the individual cell.
And therefore, at the organism, organ, system levels, whichever level you are looking at the time. Because something affects each and every individual cell, it therefore affects every individual given patch of tissue, organ, or the organism as a whole, Michael. Still, your reductionism is remarkable. It's ridiculous, son, as are you.
Again, that's, I think, a really important anchoring point as we get into this, because this is where I think the major misconception...
The major misconception, Michael, sits entirely with you and your little mate Jay here. It is you boys who do not understand what the hell it is you're talking about. Still.
Is around thinking about things in terms of the body using carbs and fats as a whole instead of understanding it on a cell-by-cell basis.
That's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, as I've already, I think, adequately explained.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely not. Nonsense.
Absolutely. And
no, nonsense, Jay. Complete fucking nonsense.
As you mentioned, in the initial part there, normally what's going on at one cell...
You see how they haven't said a damn thing yet, except stuff that's actually demonstrably wrong? Like, don't worry what the body's doing, just think of like what an individual cell's doing. Because that's the only place the Randle Cycle has any effect. Absolute nonsense.
Is going on in other cells too, and there's a larger environment that's going to influence tissues and multiple tissues to all be acting in accordance and doing similar things. So we'll talk about that too, and where this does come into play. But as you're mentioning, and a very important caveat here that we'll get into is in it, that we'll talk about in more detail, is basically that if you're utilizing one fuel in one tissue, it doesn't mean you can't be utilizing other fuels in other tissues.
Right, nobody said that was the case.
And as you said as well,
well, nobody that understands has said that. I certainly didn't.
Sliding scale, we're never, even when it comes down to kind of burning of fuel for energy, even in that case, even if you're eating 0% fat in your diet, you're still burning some fat as a fuel, and produce it from other substrates, and then utilize it as a fuel. And same thing if you consume 0% carbs in your diet. So, and we'll actually talk about that a little bit later as well when we do get into the respiratory quotient and all of that.
That'll be fascinating, because that's a thing that at least Mike Fave has no fucking idea about whatsoever. And I suspect you probably don't either, Jay.
And the only other thing I want to mention here is, obviously, if people are, listening, watching this, they're probably dealing with various chronic health issues that they're looking on resolving. And so if that is you...
Nobody healthy listens to anything you have to say. That's sad for you.
If you are dealing with low energy symptoms like chronic cravings and hunger, low energy or fatigue, chronic pain, weight gain, digestive symptoms, brain fog, poor sleep, hormonal imbalances, or any low energy conditions like autoimmune conditions, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, or any other chronic health issues or conditions, then head over to...
Yeah, don't do that, because this boy doesn't have the first clue of what he's talking about whatsoever.
Where you can sign up for the free Energy Balance mini course, where I'll walk you through the best diet, exercise, and lifestyle strategies.
You don't know anything about any of those things, Jay Feldman, whatsoever. You have no business professing to anybody on any of those topics whatsoever. None.
Strategies to resolve these low energy symptoms and conditions by maximizing your cellular energy.
Rubbish. Absolute fucking nonsense.
So again, head over to...
Yeah, don't do that. Absolutely under no circumstances should anybody do that.
Energy, sign up for that free Energy Balance.
Well, you get what you pay for, don't you?
Mini course. But let's start by zooming in on that individual cell, as you're saying, and identify what goes on when we're oxidizing fats, which means that we're taking those fats and converting them into energy. And
no, that's not what's happening at all, in fact. Wrong. Nonsense. Complete garbage, Jay Feldman. Right off the bat, straight away. As soon as you start talking about anything mechanistic, the first thing you say is fundamentally incorrect. Wrong. No, fats are not converted into energy. Not at all. Fats are converted into carbon dioxide plus water.
And the impacts on glucose utilization especially, that's what we'll be focusing on, along with some other aspects of the utilization of fat as a fuel that are rather unique. So just starting from the beginning and then kind of working through to each part of mitochondrial respiration, we'll start by talking about beta oxidation, then we'll get into the electron transport chain and the citric acid cycle. And Mike, I'll just start with the first couple points here, and then I'll let you hop in. But essentially what we have first when we're oxidizing fats is what's called beta oxidation. And so this is basically what allows us to take the really long chain of the fat and chop it up into smaller 2-carbon chains that become acetyl-CoA that can then enter the citric acid cycle. And you can see that in the process here, we have the production of 2 electron carriers, one being FADH2 and one being NADH. Mm-hmm. And this is very important because in order to get from fatty acids to acetyl-CoA, you produce a 1-to-1 ratio of FADH2 to NADH. You're producing equal amounts of both.
Yes. Which is a signal that the cell at large interprets, and the mitochondria itself interprets that signal. It tells it something, and it gives it a gauge as to how to behave. Good.
When we go from glucose to acetyl-CoA, which is a different pathway called glycolysis, you don't have this. You actually only produce NADH.
Correct, and that's a signal.
And so as a result, both FADH2 and NADH get produced in the citric acid cycle. For every run around, you produce 3 NADH and 1 FADH2. And so when you kind of add up all of those components at the end, you end up with far higher amounts or far higher ratio of NADH to FADH2 for glucose than with fat.
Yes, that is a signal.
Another way of saying that is that fat has a much higher FADH2 to NADH ratio.
Yes.
These electron carriers are what then go to the electron transport chain, drop off electrons there, and create, and then that basically energy is used to pump protons, and then we use that.
No, energy is not used to pump protons at all. False. Protons are not pumped, Jay. At all. Protons don't even exist in the plasma or in the cytosolic fluids at all.
Proton gradient to produce ATP.
You can't have a proton gradient when protons do not exist in cell cytosol, Jay. Still. Sorry about that, not sorry.
And when we look at
This is why you don't listen to boys that don't understand this shit. Fundamentally, everything these boys have to say about the Randle cycle and its workings is false. Demonstrably, unequivocally, absolutely false. Why would you take advice from these boys? Other than because their level of misinformation, miseducation, their misinterpretations, their misapprehensions about what this is and how it works are above the level of where most people are. So the people that are even less knowledgeable about this than these two idiots put these guys up on a platform and go, oh, these guys great. They're not. They're imbeciles. They're worse than someone who knows nothing because they're making out like they do know something, and they don't.
Electron transport chain, there are some unique differences about where we drop the electrons off that have an impact on other aspects of how we utilize fuel and on
Correct. Yes.
mitochondrial respiration. So this difference between FADH2 and NADH ends up being very important. And so we can see that depicted here where with glucose, we're producing much more NADH, and so they're showing that in this diagram that we're getting that NADH from glucose. You do get some FADH2 as well, but it's a far lower amount relative to NADH. Mm-hmm. Whereas with beta oxidation, that FADH2 to NADH ratio is far higher. Yes. So we're relying a lot more on that FADH2 and dropping a lot more electrons off.
Reliance is the wrong word. It's a signal. It has utility.
Complex 2 and at another set of enzymes that we'll get into in a second. But as a result of this, we end up with some problems at the electron transport chain.
Folks, no, we don't. Absolute rubbish.
Essentially, when we're going from when these electrons are being taken up by complex 1 and complex 2, they then have to be passed on to ubiquinone, which is also known as coenzyme Q, which then takes them on to complex 3. And when there's this basically huge flood of electrons coming in from multiple sources, the amount of ubiquinone that's filled with electrons increases. Basically, all of the ubiquinone is basically taking up these electrons,
mm-hmm.
but the rest of the electron transport chain can't function fast enough to move those along.
According to whom? On the basis of what? Would you like to cite a single peer-reviewed reference where this has been measured objectively and shown to be a problem of any kind, Jay? Shall we wait? I can assure readers, because I'm an expert in this field, actually, that no such evidence exists to suggest that any problem exists here whatsoever. One of the very most basic things that Jay has clearly seems to have not got his head around here, and it's because he actually hasn't thought about this, he's just repeating nonsense he's been told by somebody else because he doesn't have the skills to look at this subjectively for himself. Here's the thing. If the ratio of FADH2 to NADH is altered towards FADH2 because of beta oxidation of fats occurring, that means the amount of NADH is reduced, doesn't it? So where's the problem? Because you're going to suggest the problem is we can't get all the NADH through now because FADH2 is gumming up coenzyme Q10. Oh. Okay. Idiot.
And so we kind of see that here, and we'll get into some other aspects of this diagram.
Do you see how this here is a diagram put together by somebody at some point, possibly published somewhere, who knows? But do you see how this is not an empirical data set undertaken or derived from an experiment where these things have been actually measured objectively using a valid piece of kit to do that? Do you see how this is a theoretical model? This is a construct. No? Okay.
This is, of course, slightly more complicated one, but you can see in the center this QH2, and that's the, in this case, ubiquinol. That's ubiquinone that has the electrons there. And so it's pulled those electrons from complex 1 and complex 2, and then also the ETF enzyme complex that we'll talk about in a minute. And so as a result, you get this basically buildup of excess electrons.
Folks, no, you don't. Absolute rubbish. This is a construct. This is a model. And it's a model that fails in being a description of objective reality.
That are in the form of ubiquinol. And as a result of this, you see some problems here at the electron transport chain.
No, you don't. Still. False.
We'll have to come up with some analogies, Mike. I'm sure you have some on top of mind, so I'll let you hop in with those in a second. But basically, there's too much energy kind of bound up in the electron transport chain.
Absolute garbage. No, there isn't. Rubbish.
And so a couple of things can happen. One is you can actually have reverse electron transport.
Great, has that ever been measured?
The electrons get transferred back to complex 1.
Let's say it does happen, just for fun. This reverse transport that you're talking about. So?
And then get sent off from complex 1 or picked up by oxygen and become reactive oxygen species.
Oh, right, and then what happens after that? Oh, yeah. H2O2 dismutase, glutathione, and a whole suite of other antioxidants manufactured by the cell, designed by the body to break that down. But in the meantime, the pooling of any reactive oxygen species that occurs during mitochondrial respiration is also, Jay, a signal of utility. It tells the cell what the energetic state of the cell is. It helps the cell to understand, for want of a better term, what the fuel source is, ergo how to manage the fuel mix. Good. No problem.
Or superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, we'll talk about those. But that's one thing that can happen that's depicted here in this first figure. And in the second figure, they show a number of different sites where we see reactive oxygen species produced.
But do we though? Have these been measured, Jay, still? Or is this still a construct put together by someone who clearly hasn't really thought about this? Someone who is a reductionist like you two ridiculous boys are, who thinks that making a chart like this proves your point, when in fact it does not.
You can see that they are produced at complex 1.
Can we? Please cite the research paper that establishes this fact. Dear oh dear.
The electron transport chain, but also at complex 3, and then also at the ETF complex. So ETF is the electron transfer flavoprotein, and then you can see that works with the ETF.
What you can see is somebody's theoretical model, somebody's construct here. What we don't see is any evidence of any actual phenomena measured in any working mitochondria in anybody's cells still.
QO, that's the ETF oxidoreductase, which helps to transfer those electrons onto ubiquinone, but you can also get reactive oxygen species produced there.
According to whom, on the basis of what? And even if it is true, and is an observable phenomenon at any point, so what?
So you basically have this big buildup of electrons that goes on at the electron transport chain.
No, you don't, still.
As a result of this difference in FADH2 to NADH ratio from fatty acid metabolism, and that leads to excess reactive oxygen species production.
No, it doesn't, still.
One other thing that it causes here, and then I'll let you hop in, Mike, is that because you have this buildup here, this backup at the electron transport chain.
This hypothetical backup that you propose exists, that you haven't shown us any reason to believe does in fact exist, and even if there is a pool of electrons being held for a time in the electron transport chain before they're able to proceed through, so what?
You have reduced offloading of electrons from NADH to convert NADH to NAD+.
Luckily, because the ratio is altered towards FADH2, that's counteracted by the fact that there is fucking less NADH that requires that. However, there is a change in the NADH to NADH plus ratio, absolutely, and that, Jay, is a fucking signal that the cell understands. Good.
And so as a result, you have a buildup in the NADH to NAD plus ratio. Another way of saying that is that you have a decreased NAD plus to NADH ratio. And
thanks for that.
That then has downstream effects.
Effects, you say? What are those effects, Jay?
So a couple of the main things we're seeing here are increased reactive oxygen species.
No, we're not still, because that's taken care of by the antioxidants.
And a decreased NAD plus to NADH ratio.
So what? Still, that's a signal and it's of utility, yes?
As a result of fat metabolism.
Yes, those are signals. Yes.
And this has various downstream effects.
Well, you've said that, but you haven't given us any.
That will then interfere with glucose metabolism and have some other effects too.
That's right, they do, and that's the way they're supposed to work. A cell that is oxidizing a bunch of fat clearly has enough energy on board to continue doing that, and to allow a bunch of glucose to pour into the cell would be deleterious to that process, in that glucose would build up according to its concentration gradient in the blood to such an extent within the cell that cell would become damaged by glycation. Ergo, the effect that the cell understands that it's burning fat and therefore locks the door on the inside, for want of a better term. It's a variable effect lock. It's a fader, not a on-off. Discouraging the input of glucose to the cell is therefore entirely indicated. For goodness sake. Stupid boy.
The way I think about it in general when
You don't think about anything, Michael, it seems, including the fact that your job is to clean the fucking bedpans.
When I'm going through the Randle cycle here and I'm trying to understand what's going on with fat oxidation, inhibiting carb oxidation is in both. So you have beta oxidation, which is where you basically
we've covered this, Michael. Can we move on now?
Oxidize fats. You start the process of taking the electrons off fats and turning that into cellular energy in the form.
No, you don't turn electrons into cellular energy. No, you don't. You don't turn electrons into anything. You silly boy.
Of ATP. And then you have glycolysis.
You certainly don't turn electrons into ATP. No.
This, which is the glucose side that produces pyruvate to go into the Krebs cycle. Those are the two different pathways.
Pyruvate does not go into the Krebs cycle, Michael. Acetyl coenzyme A does, which is what happens when pyruvate goes through the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, for goodness sake.
In both pathways, you're basically stealing electricity.
No, not electricity, not at all. Absolutely false. Ridiculous.
Form of electrons off of carbs and off of fats, and you're storing them in those batteries.
No, it's not a battery. No.
The analogy comes in, the NADH and the FADH2. Those batteries are brought into the electron transport chain, which is basically kind of like a wire that
no, it's not.
Transmits electricity across the different proteins. They basically function to some extent like a wire. They have.
No, this is totally inept as an analogy. It's completely false, Michael. No such thing is going on whatsoever, in fact.
Iron sulfur clusters inside them that are conducting the electrons, bringing them across to oxygen as the final electron acceptor. And as they do that, they're pumping protons or H+ ions across them.
False. No such thing is occurring, in fact. Absolutely false, Michael. Yes, that is an assertion that you will see published again and again and again in textbooks. You will see it referred to in peer-reviewed literature. Yes. That does not mean it's correct. It isn't correct. H+ does not exist in cell cytosol. Still. And it's not pumped anywhere. Still.
Membrane. And also those batteries are getting drained.
They're still not batteries, and neither do they get drained. Because if you prevent mitochondria from doing what they do, you die.
The NADH goes to NAD+, and the FADH2 goes to FADH. So what happens, though, is if that wire gets backlogged, gets jammed up.
It's not jammed up. Neither is it backlogged, still.
And you're basically unable to transfer those electrons. Well, you can't. Well, the wire starts producing kind of like, I don't know, you get to call it dirty electricity.
Oh, absolute fucking garbage. Wrong.
Like a little bit of smoke.
Oh my god, even worse analogy. No.
And that's where you get the reactive oxygen species, the superoxide, and then which gets converted into hydrogen peroxide.
Again, do we have a measurement of that, an objective measurement of that still? No, and even if we do, hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, goes directly to H2O2 dismutase, which breaks it down, doesn't it? Right, so what's the problem?
But on top of that, then you can't bring those batteries, the new batteries.
They're still not a fucking battery.
That are coming in, can't unload that electricity.
That's still not fucking electricity.
And so you get this buildup of the NADH, and you get that buildup of, well, not as much of the FADH2, but you really get this buildup of the NADH.
Yes, which is a signal of utility, still.
Now, this is a problem on multiple fronts. So,
no, it isn't. Still. This is the body understanding via signaling that the predominant fuel at this time is fatty acid oxidation, and that a very, very powerful source of glucose incoming is required to tip those mitochondria off that course of action, and to thus open that gate and allow those carbohydrates to once again enter that cell. It's all of utility. It all happens for a reason. It's supposed to happen, and it is not a problem of any kind still.
If you start jamming up the electron transport chain.
Absolute nonsense.
Then that's going to create issues at the mitochondrial membrane.
Absolute nonsense.
In terms of allowing things to flow through in general. And so,
why would that be a problem? It's a signal of utility.
What you wind up seeing is the electron transport chain gets shut down.
No, it doesn't, because if that were the case, Michael, you would die. Fuck's sake, child. Ridiculous boy.
A high amount of protons on one side of the membrane versus the...
You don't have any amount of protons whatsoever on either side of the membrane. None at all, you ridiculous buffoon. None.
The other side of the membrane, and you start to see the flow of those things start to decrease a bit.
Very technical. Very well explained there, Michael. You fucking imbecile. No.
And you have to have something like uncoupling come in, where basically it doesn't...
All right, so another adaptive homeostatic mechanism that does exactly what it's supposed to do to prevent any kind of problem. Fantastic. Uncoupling protein. Good.
Couple to produce ATP. So when you're running the fats, you get a shutdown electron transport chain.
No, you fucking don't. Still.
You get a buildup of the NADH and the FADH2.
Yes, that's a signal.
And you get a less production of ATP per unit of oxygen consumed.
Yes, but so what? That's a signal as well.
So it's not really it's basically the fats are slowing everything down, clogging everything up.
No, not clogging everything up, not whatsoever. Slowing down things, yes, perhaps. Not to a level that's deleterious in any way, shape or form to the functioning of the human body whatsoever. It is a signal which has downstream effects, if you want to think of upstream and downstream in what is ostensibly a cycle of ongoing renewing carry-on, which I'm sure you boys don't even understand. Well, it's clear you don't understand it because you haven't even got the basic first principles at your command here.
To some extent. And then the other thing is those batteries, well...
They're still not fucking batteries.
Where are those batteries, where are they needed? Well, they go back to the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle, again, is harvesting those electrons off of the fats and the carbs, but they don't have enough of the empty batteries to fill those batteries.
It's hydrogen that's being harvested, not just electrons. Idiot.
So they don't have enough NAD anymore. So you see isocitrate dehydrogenase, alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase, and then PDH pyruvate dehydrogenase, which links the Krebs cycle to glycolysis.
That's right. And it's that which is shut down that discourages the oxidation of pyruvate, which comes ostensibly from carbohydrates, when the fats are predominating. That's how it's supposed to work. Thus allowing fats to continue to do their thing and discouraging the input of carbohydrates. Fantastic! The thing works. Great. Still, no surprise, after at least 3,800 million fucking years of both positive and negative selection pressures, which have moulded this exact enzymatic pathway so that it works precisely as it should. Goodness gracious, there it is.
They can't function appropriately, and then it starts...
It is appropriate, because it's supposed to fucking happen under those circumstances, you absolute cockmonkey.
To back up that electron transport chain a bit with citrate and also acetyl-CoA.
And what does the citrate do when it flows back into the cell cytosol? It further discourages the feeding into the pathway of carbohydrate sources by directly blockading, or discouraging is a better term, some of the enzymatic reactions leading to the production of the pyruvate in the first place. And secondly, there's an effect on AMP kinase such that most, if not all, depending on how strong the activation is, most or all of the GLUT4 transporters are withdrawn from the cell membrane, invaginate, pinch off, and sink into the cell cytosol, thus removing them from having any ability to transport glucose into that cell, irrespective of the level of insulin in the blood. That's how it's supposed to work. It works perfectly. Job's a good one. And Mike Fave and his little mate Jay Feldman are fucking imbeciles. What's next?
So then now you're seeing this whole backlog of the system.
You're still not seeing a backlog of any system, no.
that then backs up and then that starts to shut down the entrance of carbs.
Absolutely fucking nonsensical description of a perfectly functional aspect of the human metabolic system that works perfectly. This is not a pathology. This is not a problem. This is not a backup or a blockade. This is the system working perfectly.
Into the mitochondria, particularly at pyruvate dehydrogenase, because of the lack of NAD+, but also because of the build of a citrate, the build of acetyl-CoA, which activate other proteins like pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase that inhibits pyruvate dehydrogenase as well. And so you can't oxidize the carbohydrates fully now. The electron transport chain is backed up a bit.
No, it still fucking isn't backed up. Still.
And you're producing more smoke.
You are not producing any fucking smoke whatsoever, you ridiculous cunt. No, you're not.
Those fatty acids across the board. So yeah, the fats are inhibiting the utilization of glucose.
As they should. That's the way the system is designed. It's supposed to do that still. Yep.
But they're also they're creating that ROS inside the mitochondria.
Which is dealt with still.
Electron transport chain. And they're also leading to shifts in the NAD plus NADH ratio.
Which is a signal of utility still.
And they're jamming the electron.
No, they're not jamming anything whatsoever. Jamming means preventing it from working. It's still working. It's working fine. It's working exactly the way it's supposed to work when there is a predominance of fat being oxidized. Still.
On transport chain up a bit. They're like basically backlogging the wire.
They still aren't, and it's still not a wire.
That's transferring those electrons, so it's not moving appropriately. So it
is doing exactly what it should do, absolutely appropriately, you ridiculous fucking cunt.
This is not really an ideal circumstance.
Yes, it is, when there is a predominance of fat to oxidize. That's why the evolutionary process over 3,800 million fucking years has put that in place. For fuck's sake. Still.
And when I've seen other people in the low-carb community talk about the Randle cycle.
Other people? Who's that? Mike? Other people.
They kind of dismiss a lot of times talking about the mitochondrial component of it.
No, they dismiss what you say. Those of us that understand this thing, they dismiss what you say, Michael, for what it is, which is absolute fucking nonsense. Theoretical, constructural garbage from someone who does not understand either homeostasis, nor signaling, nor energetics, nor any aspect of the Randle cycle and why it is there. Garbage from an imbecile.
Dismiss talking about the electron transport chain.
Well, only those that don't understand the thing don't mention the thing. There are many people talking about the Randle cycle since I started doing it, trying to appropriate the thing in their social media influencing. I really wish they wouldn't. This should really be left to me, I think, at this stage. And certainly not to these two idiots. Absolutely not under any circumstances should these two idiots be given any credence in this field whatsoever. None.
And some of the stuff that goes on directly in the Krebs cycle and the NAD plus and NADH ratios.
Yeah, but you don't understand any of that. All you're doing, Michael, is repeating mindlessly something that was said to you, either directly or indirectly, by someone who's just as mindless as you are. What you're not doing is actually critically appraising the thing and understanding what it is, how it works, and why it is there. Okay, what's next?
And the NADH to FADH2 ratios. And you can't dismiss that because this is telling us, like, this is actually not ideal.
No, Michael, that's your opinion. And it's not based in the remotest competence. It's fucking ridiculous what you're saying. Absolutely, utterly fucking ridiculous. As are you, son.
This is showing us why this is a problem.
It is not a fucking problem. Unless you attempt to pour carbohydrates down your neck as well as fats. Then it will become a problem because you are trying to impose something that is contraindicated. unnecessary carbohydrates. Idiot.
And it's also giving us hints on why carb oxidation would actually be superior in this circumstance.
It does no such thing whatsoever, you ridiculous fucking imbecile. Wrong.
Compared to fat oxidation because of the effects that we're seeing from the fat oxidation.
What effects are those, Michael? Things that you propose occur in your reductionist construct, your model, which you have not supported with any experimental evidence to suggest that those things do occur, or that those things are problematic in any way, shape, or form. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. Too many leaps of faith, sunshine. Leaps of faith based on your total misapprehension of the objective reality of what this system is, how it works, and why it exists.
For me, I think the understanding what's going on in the mitochondria...
You don't, clearly, though, Michael.
...is absolutely key. And
yes, it is key, but you don't. That's the problem. And your Dunning Kruger is so severe, your cognitive dissonance is so severe that you cannot get your head around the possibility that you are a boy in short pants who does not understand this at all. You think your pretty little diagrams and pictures put together by other imbeciles proves your point. Crazy.
Seeing that change in ATP produced per amount of oxygen consumed.
So what? That's supposed to happen.
Seeing that change in that NAD plus NADH ratio.
Supposed to happen.
Seeing that change in NADH to FADH2 ratio. And
supposed to happen.
Seeing that ROS production.
No, still not. No, false.
And that slowdown across the electron transport chain.
Which is supposed to happen. And is not a clogging or a backlogging in any way, shape, or form. It's a signal, still.
Those are all not great signals.
Rubbish. That's your interpretation. That's your opinion, Michael. And it's full of shit. It's nonsense.
In terms of energy production, when you're looking at the utilization of fatty acids, beyond the fact that it's inhibiting carbohydrate oxidation.
But that's not a negative thing. That's what's supposed to happen when there is a predominance of fat. Because there is, Michael, in that situation, sufficient energetic substrate being oxidized to produce sufficient ATP for cell purpose at that time. Not a problem, still, of any kind. Unless you try and pour carbohydrates down your neck. In which case, that's going to become a problem.
As well. Even those things by themselves are problems. And I think this is...
No, they fucking aren't. Not at all. Ridiculous. Nonsensical, arrogant, ignorant, pustulous, excremental garbage from an imbecile.
And this is a really big piece, and this is where the Randle cycle actually gives...
Well, it's the only big piece you're ever going to see.
This indication. I remember when I was first going through this, like, oh, this is why I want to oxidize carbohydrate.
Well, then you're a fucking imbecile, because no, you don't.
Instead of primarily oxidizing fatty acids.
No, that's not what you want to do at all.
And then when we get into it later, it'll help us understand what's going on in disease states and how...
No, it won't, Michael, because you don't have the most fundamental basic understandings even of what this thing is, how it functions, or why it exists still. So what makes you think you are remotely in a position to profess upon health effects, therefore? Absolutely ridiculous, child.
How is this process involved in some of these metabolically dysfunctional states like type 2 diabetes, like obesity, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And
absolutely. TP for my bunghole.
To highlight what you're saying here, of course, the reactive oxygen species in and of themselves are a problem.
No, they're not. Absolute fucking nonsense. Wrong.
That you're getting from fat metabolism.
Have you measured that? No? Have you shown us a problem of any kind? No? Ever heard of H2O2 dismutase glutathione? No? Fuck off, imbecile.
And that's because these basically are going to create oxidative stress. They'll end up causing damage.
What's oxidative stress, Jay? Define that for us. And see if you can do that without mentioning antioxidants, which do in fact exist because they're encoded for in our gene set. We make them ourselves. There's a suite of them. I've mentioned 2 of them. There's a whole bunch. What's next?
To your protein structure, your lipids, you end up with lipid peroxidation.
Okay, so leaps of faith. Now you're saying necessarily there's a problem here. If you oxidize fat, you will have oxidative stress, whatever the fuck that's supposed to be, and that will fuck up your proteins and structures and things. Absolutely. Absolute rubbish. Complete fucking garbage. What's next?
End up with a ton of issues if there's excess oxidative stress, so we don't...
Nonsense. Still nonsense. Doesn't matter how many times you say this as if it's some kind of fact. It's still not. It's still fucking nonsense. What's next?
Want to be producing this excess reactive oxygen species at...
Rubbish. You do because it's a signal of utility at that time. It's one of the ways the cell knows what it should be doing. It's one of the ways whereby those 3 enzymes, the so-called first 3 enzymes of the Krebs cycle, the ones that allow pyruvate derived acetyl coenzyme A to pour through, it shuts those down, as it should, because that's how it's supposed to work. What's next?
The electron transport chain, so much so that our bodies will undergo uncoupling, or the cells will undergo uncoupling.
So you mean homeostatic mechanisms that occur precisely to prevent a problem? Fuck's sake, Jay. Seriously, son. Do you actually engage your possibly 1 or 2 functioning brain cells at all before opening your rancid, stupid, ridiculous fucking mouth? Seems like not. What's next?
Mitochondria will undergo uncoupling, as you were saying.
Which it's supposed to, because that prevents a problem. The problem that you've just told us exists. And then you've just told us the reason it doesn't. Fuck's sake.
Which basically says, this is so inefficient, and we're producing so much reactive oxygen species, we're just not even going to produce ATP at all. We're just going to...
Absolute fucking garbage. If you don't produce ATP at all, you die. You're producing enough ATP, still, from the oxidation of acetyl coenzyme A derived from fatty acids, still. There is some signaling around the fact that that's occurring around FADH to NADH ratio, its effect on coenzyme Q, or Q10, whatever you want to call it, ubiquinone, that system, and how that functions with respect to the Krebs cycle in such a way as to facilitate the turning off or on of those so-called first 3 enzymes in there. And there's a system that prevents a dangerous build-up, or a build-up beyond the level which is useful as a signal, that would be damaging. Fuck's sake. This is just nonsense from children. Absolute fucking nonsense from start to finish.
Burn this fuel right off. So we have that go on, which also leads to a state of a lack of energy available.
Rubbish. Absolute fucking nonsense. No, it doesn't.
But then also, as you were saying, the low NAD plus to NADH ratio slows down the entire path of energy production.
All you're doing is repeating the same ridiculous fucking nonsense that Mike Favors just said, Jay. Do you have any independent thought process of your own? Do you have anything to add to this? If not, shut your fucking mouth. Because he's just as fucking stupid as you are. If you've got nothing independent to say here, just say, thanks, Mike, for your explanation. And then leave it to me to correct it, which I have done, more than adequately, I think. And we can all move on, having learned something, i.e., show some fucking discernment as to who you listen to online for information, people. Don't listen to boys in short pants with no qualifications or experience in the area that they're professing on. Don't do that. Simple, really.
Slows down the entire citric acid cycle because you need to have the NAD plus available for those steps, as well as, of course, pyruvate.
So now you're forgetting the fact that there's a pathway across to cut those 3 enzymes out, thus meaning that in effect, the distance around, if you like to think of it as around, the Krebs cycle is shorter. And in fact, there is no slowdown at all. Oh dear, that's a shame for you.
dehydrogenase. But even if you're just utilizing the fats as a fuel, the whole process, you basically are putting the brakes on.
No, you're not. Still. Not at all. Rubbish.
Because of this low NAD plus to NADH ratio.
Absolute fucking garbage.
And just to kind of come back to the analogy, because I think it was a good one.
No, it wasn't. It was absolute fucking rubbish.
You know, talking about the batteries, right? It's like...
That's not a fucking battery. Still.
Adding on to the analogy a bit, you have like these rechargeable batteries, right? And you're trying to use the energy from the fats or the carbs to charge up the batteries. And so we have the NAD...
No, that's not what's happening at all. That's an absolutely hopeless analogy for the function of mitochondria.
Plus, which is the uncharged batteries, and the NADH, which is the charged batteries. And if all of the batteries are charged, you don't have any more available to pull the energy off of the fuel that you have. So
in which case you'd die, wouldn't you? That doesn't happen. Ergo, your hypothetical problem that we're talking about is just that. A hypothetical construct which does not bear out in the objective reality in which we find ourselves. Thank you for coming.
You can't use the fuel. It's just sitting there. And the reason for this is because you have a backlog at the construction site, or, you know, these...
Absolute fucking nonsense still. No such thing as an effect at all.
Assembly line there, where they have all of these extra charged batteries, but they don't have the materials. They can't continue working. The batteries are accumulating at too fast of a rate, and so you're not actually able to use them, and you get this whole backup through the whole chain.
Absolute fucking nonsense still.
As opposed to things moving very efficiently and everything being kind of properly orchestrated.
It is properly orchestrated by 3,800 million fucking years of evolution, you stupid cunt.
So that's what we're seeing here in this state of fat metabolism.
No, we fucking aren't. Still.
So as you said, Mike, there's the low NAD plus to NADH ratio, which...
Yes, as we've said already, yes, it's a signal, it's of utility. It has a role to play, yes.
Interferes with the citric acid cycle, leads to...
No, it doesn't interfere with it. It changes the way in which the thing functions by, in effect, cutting out, so-called, the first bit of it and providing a shortcut across, thus cutting out the acetyl coenzyme A as derived from pyruvate, as it should. Still.
A buildup of citrate, and then also... another factor there is aconitase, which is the enzyme that converts citrate to isocitrate. You can see that in this diagram.
Yes.
That gets inhibited by reactive oxygen species. It's one of the most sensitive enzymes.
Yes. For that very fucking reason that I've just said. It stops that enzyme playing a role in this cycle, thus causing a shortcut to be in play across from somewhere else. Okay? And that shortcut across the cycle is not shown on this chart. In fact, you won't see it on most charts of the Krebs cycle. Not because it's not understood, not because it doesn't exist. It does. It's there. The enzymes are there. That causes, in this situation, that causes the cycle to shortcut itself across that pathway and keep running perfectly efficiently under the influence of the NADH to NAD ratio, the amount of FADH2 as opposed to not, and all these other things that are all concomitant with the production of energy from beta oxidation as opposed to from pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. Still. Awesome.
The citric acid cycle to oxidative stress.
No. What's that? Define that for us. Still.
You also have inhibition there, and these things lead to a buildup of the citrate and a buildup...
As is supposed to happen, yes.
Buildup of the acetyl-CoA as well.
Yes, as is supposed to happen.
And so, as you were saying, those things inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase along with...
Yes, as is supposed to happen in that circumstance, yes.
The low NAD plus to NADH ratio.
Yes, as is supposed to happen still.
It's not shown here, but, you know, we have this other diagram here where you can actually see that the pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme also needs the NAD+. It also needs that uncharged battery.
That's right. So the thing is tapped off at multiple steps, to strongly discourage the flow of energetic substrates through that pathway, precisely because sufficient energy is being supplied through the other pathway, that from beta oxidation. You fucking imbecile. Ergo, the upstream effect of that is an effect on AMP kinase, causing the invagination, pinching off and sinking into the cell cytosol of the GLUT4, thus effectively preventing glucose from entering the cell from the external component at that time, as is supposed to fucking happen. Still.
And so you have multiple layers of inhibition at this step, as well as you said, Mike, as the activation of pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase, which also decreases this enzyme activity. So you have multiple steps here that not only are causing general oxidative stress and so on.
No, still not happening. False.
The citric acid cycle, but also this is where, as you said, you block the utilization of glucose,
which is supposed to fucking happen still.
The fuel, and this continues out into the cytosol. This is a figure from a paper titled The Randle Cycle Revisited.
Yes, I've used these diagrams myself quite a few times, including once on the Judy Cho program, where actually at the time I was talking to Judy Cho, there was nothing up on the screen, and I was talking to a diagram that was going to be inserted later by the production crew or something. They got the diagrams around the wrong way. Embarrassing for everybody. But anyway, that happened in the past. In the present, what's occurring here is this is the situation where fat oxidation is predominant because there is a lot of fat available for oxidation. Go on though, Jay, tell us about it.
New head for an old hat, which is one that we've referenced in the past.
And also, there's a bunch of ridiculous statements in that paper that are not scientific or supported by anything evidentiary either. This is also a construct, a model. It's accurate as to the mechanisms, but the rest of that paper is rubbish. It's badly tainted by opinions. We all know about those, don't we?
You can see here that this is showing under the case of fatty acid metabolism. You have the buildup of acetyl-CoA and citrate inside the mitochondria.
Yes.
And that those things will interfere with pyruvate dehydrogenase.
Yes.
But then you also see that because there's this increase in citrate, it ends up making its way into the cytosol.
Yes.
And the buildup...
How does that happen, Jay? Shall I tell you? It's co-transported with malate and oxaloacetate, which then drive that shortcut that I'm talking about. Anyway, what's next?
Citrate there will then interfere with some of the other enzymes needed for glycolysis.
Yep.
One of the main ones being phosphofructokinase, which is the rate-limiting step for glycolysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is another major way that you're seeing a slowdown of glucose utilization from fat utilization.
As is supposed to happen,
Again, this part in particular is not necessarily a problem.
That's right. It necessarily is not a problem. It's absolutely indicated and of utility still, yes.
It's just one of the mechanisms through which we're seeing, one fuel being utilized and blocking the other. So this isn't necessarily pathologic. We'll talk about cases where it is pathologic, but this is just some of what we see happens when you're utilizing fats as a fuel and how it further interferes with glucose utilization.
I just want to add one piece to this. The hexokinase inhibition and the phosphofructose kinase inhibition isn't complete. So the hexokinase is only 20 to 30%, and the phosphofructose kinase is only 40 to 60% inhibition. But PDH is a complete inhibition. So you
depends on the rate of beta oxidation, buffhead.
You can still have glucose come in these states when you're pushing the fatty acid oxidation into the cell. So you don't get this shutout of glucose from the cell.
Depends on the cellular energetic state, buffhead.
You basically just get a circumstance where the glucose goes in, it runs through glycolysis, and it can't go into the mitochondria because PDH is shut down. And so that's why you see in people who have diabetes, and we've talked about other papers, lactate production gets increased pretty heavily.
And? So fucking what?
Because you can take that pyruvate and convert it to lactate. And then also, this goes with the intracellular AGEs stuff, where the pentose phosphate pathway and the hexosamine biosynthetic pathway and the glycolytic pathway as well, glycolysis, when you have metabolic dysfunction, the substrates or the glucose moving through glycolysis and not being able to move into the mitochondria because PDH is shut down leads to this backlog through those pathways, and then that's where you see age formation. So it's not under normal circumstances where everything is kind of like flowing in nice and well.
So the solution to that, buff head, is not to pour contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates down your stupid fucking neck, isn't it? Yes. What's next?
Glucose comes in, it's converted to pyruvate. Pyruvate goes to the Krebs cycle. You get this nice, beautiful NADH to FADH2 ratio.
According to whom, on the basis of what? What is nice and beautiful? You fucking imbecile.
You flow through the electron transport chain, and you get your ATP, right? When things are flowing through, great.
And you still get that when you're oxidizing fat. That's still the end result of it. And it's still sufficient. And the use of glucose is tapped off because it ought to be still.
Everything is going well.
And the problem still remains the pouring down your stupid fucking neck of contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates. Still.
Oh, it's only when you start to get the significant metabolic dysfunction that
What metabolic? You are referring to the discouragement of glucose oxidation as a dysfunction. It isn't. It's entirely functional. Fucking imbecile.
You then start to see things start backlogging in all the cells. The glycogen contents get increased. The
Oh, that's terrible.
phosphate pathway bumps up. The polyol pathway, the other one is what I wanted to mention.
So homeostatic mechanisms are at play still. Yes, good.
Before that gets backed up, and then that's
No,
where
not backed up. No, that's false. That's a completely false analogy.
you start seeing the problems because people like to
What
say,
problems? What's a problem? Is that something that's important to understand? Problems?
oh, glucose causes X, Y, and Z, and it's like metabolic dysfunction causes X, Y, and Z.
No, it doesn't, because it's not a dysfunction that glucose oxidation is discouraged when there is sufficient fat to do the job. It's not a dysfunction. The dysfunction is the pouring in of unnecessary contraindicated carbohydrates. Still. Fucking imbecile.
And glucose doesn't necessarily cause that. It's just in the state of metabolic dysfunction when you're forced.
Oh, shut up, you mindless cunt. Seriously. You absolute fucking ridiculous buffoon.
To burn fatty acids, it shunts glucose into all these other pathways. Because again,
It wouldn't do that if there wasn't a whole bunch of glucose there that shouldn't be there, would it? Imbecile. No.
PDH that we talked about gets completely shut down.
No. That's a possibility, and very strong activations, full slider activations of the fader that we're referring to as the Randle Cycle effect. But it's almost never fully activated.
But phosphofructose kinase and hexokinase don't get completely shut down.
You've already said this, buffhead. It had no effect on objective reality the first time you said it, neither was it particularly of any utility or sense to the discussion thread at the time, and it still isn't.
So these are these are, I think, important things.
Important, are they? Very important.
To put in context here when we're thinking about some of these states, because
You mean connext?
this also all directly ties in and helps you to understand the full picture of like, well, when are you?
Nothing that you say, Mike Fave, helps anybody understand the full picture of anything. You are a fucking imbecile. You are a ill-educated, arrogant sufferer of the worst case of Dunning Kruger I've seen in quite some time. You're as dumb as two short planks. And twice as fucking useless. What's next?
Why are we seeing ages, advanced glycation end products in?
Well, the hint is in the word, the title of the thing, how it's described, glycation. It occurs, Mike, because of an overplus of carbohydrate in the system that ought not be there. Still.
Diabetics, when it's like, because they're not using the glucose well. They're not using.
Right. And neither are they supposed to. That's the begging the question fallacy right there, isn't it? You should be able to oxidize any amount of carbohydrate. No. False. The biological design of a human being is to run most of the time on fat and not carbohydrates. Idiot.
In the carbohydrate well, because things aren't working well, PDH shut down, they're not going to
They're working perfectly still. This is the result of 3,800 million fucking years of evolution at least. You fucking ridiculous, arrogant little boy. What's next?
be able to bring that carbohydrate and oxidize it appropriately into the mitochondria.
Oh my god, appropriately according to whom, on the basis of what? Your ridiculous, ill-educated opinion.
So it's like, it's just going everywhere else. It's basically like if a river floods because it's dammed, well, all the other areas just get saturated, and it's the same thing that happens in the cells. And in
Right. So turn off the rain, if you want to use that analogy. Don't overflood your system with contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates. Jobs are good in, problem solved. Still,
and in these pathways. And the problem is not that
the problem, what problem is that? Is it an important problem?
there's too much water. The problem is that the water flow has been stopped. It's the same thing with the carbohydrate. The problem is
The end result, imbecile, either way, is too much water. Turn off the water. The entirely indicated blockade of that water flowing is not a problem. Neither is it important. Okay? What's next?
isn't necessarily that there's too much carbohydrate.
Oh, you're a fucking imbecile. You're nothing but a fucking ridiculous fucking imbecile. Do you have anything of any validity, correctness, or utility? You have anything to shed any light on this whatsoever? The answer is no. No, you don't. I'm going to talk for less than another half an hour on this, by the way. I won't get through the whole video, probably. I do have another appointment coming up. But there it is. I'll do my best to get through as much of it as I can.
The problem is that the flow of carbohydrate to energy
Shut up, you mindless c***. What's next?
has been blocked for
Stop fucking repeating yourself. It does not change the fact that what you've said is fundamentally false, ridiculous, arrogant, and ignorant, you stupid cunt. What is next?
a variety of different reasons. And in the metabolically impaired states, and this is the central hypothesis that we
Hypothesis. False hypothesis. The effect of the Randle cycle is not an impairment. It's not a dysfunction. It's the body doing what it should do.
work off of. The problem is issues in the
The
mitochondria.
problem is your arrogance, boy. That's what the problem is. It's important for you to understand that that's the problem. You are an arrogant, ignorant, stupid little boy.
Directly. And the Randle cycle helps us to see this, where it's like, if you're stuck running stress hormones and burning fats,
There is no such thing as a stress hormone, you stupid, arrogant little cunt.
you can't bring that glucose into the Krebs cycle.
Good thing it's not needed, because the exact dietary requirement for exogenous carbohydrates in human beings is not 1 single gram ever.
And the batteries that you filled into the electron transport chain to
They're still not batteries.
effectively oxidize them. So this is where the Randle cycle shines with this perspective. Not
No, it doesn't. Your perspective is fundamentally, utterly arrogant, ignorant, ridiculous, ill-educated, and nothing whatsoever to do with objective reality. And you're an offensive little boy.
well, I can't have some olive oil on my vegetables with my baked potato and a little bit of butter. It's
You
like,
shouldn't have any olive oil at all. No. No, you shouldn't.
that's not where this necessarily is so applicable.
Right. Right.
Wrong. So a ridiculous straw man to finish with. And with Jay Feldman's brilliant input there. Yeah. Anything to add, Jay?
And as you're saying, what is applicable is what you actually see in a case like insulin resistance, which
Insulin resistance is still a construct. The thing that's universally, erroneously referred to as insulin resistance and is universally thought about as some kind of pathology and the etiology of all sorts of things. No. The phenomena that you're referring to there, Jay, is the effect of the Randle cycle doing exactly what it ought to do. It's the body functioning perfectly.
We'll talk about it in more detail, but it's actually this. You actually see chronic upregulated fat oxidation, and at the same time you see increased glycolysis heading, glucose heading to lactate. You're not actually oxidizing it properly in the mitochondria.
So what? You still have perfectly sufficient ATP from the still perfectly functioning mitochondria running on fat with no problems. Still.
And yeah, as you said, there's tons of problems in that state.
No, there isn't. Well, there is if you pour the carbohydrates down your neck that you ought not, because they're toxic. That's the problem.
A number of those come from the inability to actually utilize the substrate, and you get buildup of all the intermediates, and you can have...
Not if you don't pour the substrate down your neck that ought not be there. Still!
A number of issues from that, including age production, as well as the case or the fact that you see elevated oxidative stress in this condition.
What is oxidative stress? Still. We're still waiting for an explanation on what that's supposed to be.
Both from the fatty acid oxidation and the general metabolic dysfunction.
Rubbish. Neither of those things are in play. Neither of them. Fantasy from some buffheads.
And then, and the reduced antioxidant production and all of the rest.
It's not reduced.
And as a result of that, you also see increased lipid
Who told you that, boy?
peroxidation, which is also a precursor to ages. So,
no, you don't. Who told you that? False again, child.
Number of issues there. And
No, there aren't. Still. Just saying that there are issues there that aren't there doesn't mean they're there. They're still not there.
Yeah, as they're pointing out, this idea of it being as simple as having a certain amount of glucose as a fuel equals dysfunction. It's the same as people say with insulin resistance, where hyperglycemia and hyperinsulinemia happen in the case of insulin resistance, so you never want to have any glucose or insulin. And obviously, that is a huge conflation. And we did it.
Oh my God. That's some projection right there, isn't it, you fucking imbecile? The requirement for carbohydrates remains exactly what it was at the beginning of this video and at the beginning of time, and it will still be the same at the end of time. None. Human beings do not require any fucking glucose in their diet. None at all. Still. It's contraindicated and unnecessary above a certain level, that level which causes it to start pooling in the blood because the Randle cycle does exactly what it ought to do.
A few episodes talking about insulin resistance that I'll link back to so we don't get too bogged down.
You are already too bogged down, you stupid boy.
Going through that again. But coming back here to one of the other things that's important to mention here, because it is different in the state of fat metabolism versus glucose metabolism, and that's looking at this buildup of citrate in the cytosol.
Yep.
Where we'll see with glucose metabolism, the citrate is more likely to head down to acetyl-CoA and malonyl-CoA. You see that drawn here, but that's not actually happening as much. And the reason why this is not going to be the case in the case of fatty acid metabolism, there's a few different factors. One is that there's actually a lack of CoA, which is needed to...
It's not a lack, it's a reduction. That's a completely different thing.
Which is needed along with the citrate to become acetyl-CoA because of basically the CoA is being used by the fats, to be added to the fatty acid, so it can then be brought into the mitochondria. You can actually see that on the right side of the diagram. We have the long-chain fatty acyl-CoA.
Yeah,
That's where all the CoA is going.
No, not all of it. No. Wrong, again.
We have a depletion of CoA.
Yes. Depletion isn't removal entirely, is it? Or all of it? No, it isn't.
In the case of fatty acid metabolism. And then also the enzymes that convert citrate to acetyl-CoA and then acetyl-CoA to malonyl-CoA, there's a number of things that regulate them, but one of them is the hormones, glucagon and insulin. And so in this scenario, you're going to have elevated glucagon, which inhibits those steps. It decreases the activity of the ATP.
Oh, so fucking what? What is your point, boy?
Citrate lyase and the acetyl-CoA carboxylase, which are the two enzymes that are involved there. Those are both slowed down by glucagon, and they're actually supported by insulin. So those are a couple of the mechanisms as to why the citrate won't be converted down that pathway.
So fucking what? What is your point?
Another one as well is the presence of AMP kinase, which is generally increased from oxidative stress and ROS themselves.
No, not oxidative stress. No, that's not the cause of it.
And tends to go alongside fatty acid metabolism, and that will also decrease the acetyl-CoA carboxylase, the conversion from acetyl-CoA to malonyl-CoA.
As it should, yes. So what?
So for those reasons, you see, especially in this case, the excessive citrate buildup interfering with glucose.
It's not excessive. It's exactly the level that's supposed to happen under those circumstances, according to the molecular machinery that is in place because of 3,800 million fucking years of evolution still.
That wasn't. And with that, Mike, is there anything else you want to mention as far as the fact?
So a completely pointless segue to explain why something is happening with absolutely no point in so doing. And it has no impact on any of the facts at hand, which remain unchanged by your ridiculous, arrogant, ill-educated opinion.
The metabolism side goes.
Just on the diagram that you were showing before, where you see basically the citrate acetyl-CoA and malonyl-CoA, there's another enzyme I think is important to talk about. And one thing I want to mention to kind of preface what you're saying, the malonyl-CoA is important.
Is it important? Okay.
And we'll see this in the glucose inhibition of fatty acid oxidation, because the malonyl-CoA blocks that transporter that brings fats into the mitochondria from the cytosol.
Right.
So when carbs are flowing back to malonyl-CoA, it
Why don't you bring up the other chart then that shows that?
inhibits fat oxidation.
Yes, as it should. Because if there's a whole bunch of sugar pouring through the mitochondria because there's a huge amount of it in the cell cytosol, that's going to take priority because you need to get rid of that so that it doesn't fucking damage the cell. Because glucose at high concentration is immediately toxic via glycation. Fat isn't. So it can wait. It's almost as if there's been a long time for this system, which works perfectly, to evolve.
Whereas in the fat oxidation inhibition of carbohydrate, because the citrate buildup in the cytosol that we see there, the cytosol is that orange area on the graph, that's what's inhibiting the carb utilization or glycolysis inside the cytosol.
Yes.
So the toggling between those two substrate is what actually determines the malonyl-CoA is actually extremely important for the inhibition of utilization of fatty acids. But the citrate is important for inhibiting glycolysis. There's another enzyme that plays into this as well that is not pictured here. Neither is the ATP citrate lyase or the acetyl-CoA carboxylase that you mentioned, but it's malonyl-CoA decarboxylase. And basically the general idea of the enzymes is to either allow for a lot of malonyl-CoA to be produced or be present, not just produced, but like not be degraded and be produced at the same time, or for the malonyl-CoA to be dropped so that there's very little malonyl-CoA, so a lot of degradation and a decreased production. And this is where that hormonal overlay becomes really important, as you mentioned.
Does it become important? So what you're suggesting there, Michael, is that there are homeostatic mechanisms inborn into the metabolic pathway at large to best conduce the cell to maintain its homeostasis, to continue to function, produce energy, for want of a better term, in the way that it ought to, and to do all its other functions the way it ought to, and we can relax about this. What we need to do is feed ourselves appropriately on an ongoing basis, which means that we need to take in all the required nutrients, which you will find entirely within the gambit of animal-based foods like muscle meat and associated fat. That's all you need, nothing else. And to refrain from pouring contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates down your neck by basically not adding any to your diet whatsoever. Job is a good one. That's the way we've evolved. That's how our systems are geared to run. That's the optimal fuel for us, it seems, to anyone with more than one working brain cell. And there's nothing else to talk about, but you're only about halfway through your video. It's incredible.
Jay, the insulin increases the flow of citrate to malonyl-CoA and glucagon while decreasing its breakdown. And glucagon...
Yes, so fucking what? This minutiae doesn't have any effect on the facts of what the system is, how it works, really, overall, and why it exists in the form that it does, what it's designed to do. Still.
Decreases the flow to malonyl CoA while increasing its breakdown, and that's the switch in the cytosol, which is on top of what we're seeing in the mitochondrial layer. So there's
right, so it's almost like there are multiple areas where fadas exist that all work in concert to achieve the same end. Fantastic, no problem.
Multiple pieces here. The other thing I want to mention with this is there's some influencers who have talked about...
Some influencers? Who's that, Michael?
The Randle Cycle, and have talked about, like, looked at these graphs and said, well, you know, you get to this question, it's like, well, why doesn't citrate, you know, when carbs build up citrate or stuff like this, why don't they inhibit themselves? Like, you just get to that question, like, oh.
Well, they do, actually. When you get to a certain level, a high enough level, there is a maximum at which any amount of carbohydrate can be drained through any given cell. In the same way that there's a maximum amount per unit time for fats, absolutely can start inhibiting itself, as it should, to protect itself from glycative damage that would occur should the concentration gradient remain high outside the cell, and if that were allowed to just pour in according to that gradient, then there'd be a problem. It does. Imbecile.
Well, if they have too much carbs, they will inhibit themselves. And it's like, well, this is why you need to understand the specifics here, because the flowing of citrate to malonyl CoA when you have carbohydrates will stop that. Well, you're going to just stop the fatty acid oxidation. You're not going to build up citrate to inhibit itself. Whereas with the fats, you're not going to be able to build up malonyl.
Yeah, but the citrate isn't the only way in which the discouragement of carbohydrate oxidation occurs. There are multiple different areas in which the fadas exist in different forms and can be operated, for want of a better term, in a bunch of different areas. And you need to understand all of them to be able to speak with any authority or competence in this field. And sadly, these two boys don't have that. They have bits and bobs of reductionist information and disinformation from imbeciles.
CoA, so it's not going to inhibit itself, and you're just going to get
not at that level, but it does at another level in another way.
Buildup of citrate, which is going to inhibit the carbohydrate utilization. So these are, like, there's really important nuances.
Very important nuances that you have no fucking idea about, Michael, still.
In this picture here, I think, to understand. And
yes, this is a construct, this is a model which is not complete. Yes. That's right.
The hormones directly play into this because they're controlling the enzymatic function that allows some of these things to build up.
No, controlling is too strong. Hormones have an influence. It's not a controlling influence.
Like malonyl CoA versus citrate inside the cytosol of the cell. So I want to highlight that here because there's other people who have talked about the Randle cycle.
Yes, other people. Who's that, Michael?
People cite all the time in our comments section.
Yeah, who cites other people? Who's these other people that get cited all the time, Michael? Who is that?
And they made videos where they clearly don't understand that.
Yeah, a lot of people have made videos where they clearly show that they don't understand the Randle cycle. Haven't they, Michael? I'm watching one now. Come and talk to me face to face about it, boy. Live on camera. I'll even be pleasant to you, to your face, if that's what you want me to do. Nonetheless, the facts will remain unchanged. You are an incompetent, ridiculous, ill-educated, arrogant sufferer of Dunning Kruger, who ought to go and clean the fucking bedpans. Still, because you do not understand this. From very most basic first principles. No? Okay.
And it's important to understand that
it's important, yes, it's very important.
Have these switch and these mechanisms, because if you don't get that, then you get a very weird interpretation of what happens with the Randle cycle and the utilization of these different fuel sources.
Yes, it's quite true, Michael, that if you have no understanding whatsoever of the basic first principles underpinning any of this, that you'll come up with a ridiculous interpretation of what you think it is, just like you've done in this video. Yes, your ridiculous, erroneous, false fucking video. That shows us nothing, really, other than you clearly do not understand what the Randle cycle is, how it works, or why it exists, and what the solution to the problem is, if there is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. And just
No, they weren't great points. Not at all.
to clarify for anyone who's interested, the malonyl.
So now what you're going to do is mindlessly repeat what Mike has just said again, because you don't have any fucking capacity for any independent thought of your own. So we have to sit through you repeating what Michael just said, which was fucking ridiculous from him. It'll be equally ridiculous from you, because I think you understand this even less than he does. And as such, should fuck off.
CoA decarboxylase is what converts malonyl-CoA back toward acetyl-CoA. So that's something that's active in the case of fatty acid oxidation and not in the case of glucose oxidation.
Yep, 100%.
So now you've just said that one happens and not the other, which fundamentally is not how the thing works. It's still a fader, or a series of faders, at multiple levels, still.
Great. Well, let's dig into the other side here of what goes on during glucose metabolism that reduces fatty acid metabolism. Do you
That's right. Well, why not?
want to start us off on this one, Mike?
Well, he better, because you've got no fucking idea, Jay.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I typically would start out with in terms of the glucose oxidation is under most normal states.
What's that? When it's at home.
Under all states that you don't have carbohydrate, you're fasting, you're eating a low carb diet, you're under significant stress, fatty acid oxidation is
Stress reduces your carbohydrates? How does that work, Michael?
going to predominate. And I think that needs to be said here, because what winds up happening, and this is the value of insulin, and this is the importance of insulin.
The importance of it, yeah.
When you eat carbohydrate, insulin's job is to come in and say, like, hey guys, we have, it's a parties, we brought the beers, we got the good stuff going. We have carbohydrate, and insulin's job is to start switching these processes around so that you.
No. Insulin has an impact. It has an influence. It is a signal that can be ignored to a greater or lesser degree, because the faders that control the situation are inside the cell, not out with. Still, Ben Bickman, pay attention, son.
You start to use that carbohydrate, because the thought process that I look at when I'm looking at some of the components with the Randle cycle is like, well, fatty acid oxidation is prevailing, right? So if you're in a state where you're burning fats, which you're going to be, if you're not eating, you're probably going to be burning fats within a couple hours or so.
What does that tell you, Michael? If you've got any fucking brain at all, what does that tell you?
Upregulate the fatty acid oxidation as glycogen starts to drop, and blood sugar starts to drop, etc. So the thing is, like, well, the fat oxidation is inhibiting the carb oxidation, so you can't even get the carbs in. But what happens is the insulin comes to the cell when you take in that carbohydrate, and it adjusts those enzymes.
If it's allowed to, it does.
Acetyl-CoA carboxylase, and it adjusts the ATP citrate lyase and malonyl-CoA decarboxylase.
If it's allowed to, yeah. There are other mechanisms that can prevent that from occurring if that's contraindicated to the cell homeostasis at that time.
Enzymes we were just talking about, so that you actually allow the citrate that is in the cytosol to build up and flow towards malonyl-CoA, and you stop breaking down malonyl-CoA, so that you start getting this inhibition of fatty acid oxidation, because that's going to be important, right?
Important, yeah, it's very important.
Good.
Just to clarify, you're not saying buildup of citrate. You're saying the citrate starts to flow and you actually get a decrease in the citrate as it converts toward malonyl-CoA.
Yeah, the citrate's able to flow towards malonyl-CoA, which will inhibit that blockage at phosphofructose kinase and hexokinase, and then the malonyl-CoA will stop the fatty acid oxidation because it'll block what we see there, carnitine palmitoyltransferase 1. And the insulin does this by upregulating acetyl-CoA carboxylase, as we see there, which takes the acetyl-CoA, converts it to malonyl-CoA.
No, insulin has an impact on that process. It is not the overall arbiter or controller of it of its own accord still.
And increasing ATP citrate lyase, which we see there, which takes the citrate, converts it to acetyl-CoA. And then also there's the other enzyme, malonyl-CoA decarboxylase, which isn't pictured, which basically breaks down malonyl-CoA. So you stop having malonyl-CoA break down. You have the citrate that's in the cytosol flow towards that malonyl-CoA, The malonyl-CoA inhibits carnitine palmitoyltransferase 1.
You've already said all of this. You're just repeating yourself now. For God's sake, we can also see it quite clearly on the screen right now, how that is proposed to occur. In a reductionist way, this is somebody's conceptual model, but it's not inaccurate. It's just not a complete picture.
And then now you also have more of the CoA available in the cytosol for ATP citrate lyase to work, as you alluded to earlier before, Jay. So you have that, plus you have the increased recruitment. You see there GLUT4. Insulin increases GLUT4 uptake at the cell membranes.
If it's allowed to. Again, remember the AMP kinase overriding mechanism, whereby the GLUT4 can be removed physically entirely from the cell membrane, ergo being enclosed in its own spherule of lipid bilayer inside the cell, thus meaning there is no possibility that GLUT4 can transport anything from outside the cell to inside the cell anymore, while ever that situation is in play. Okay?
So the insulin,
again, with the complete pictures, the complete understanding of what's going on, which you boys don't have.
Dependent tissues like the fat tissue, the muscle, and the liver can take up that glucose effectively. So insulin is coordinating this when we eat.
No, it's not coordinating it. It's having an effect if it's allowed to. It is not the arbiter or controller still.
Where the hormones become really important. So
yes, very important.
Can actually bring in that carbohydrate, and we can upregulate that malonyl-CoA to shut down the carnitine palmitoyltransferase 1. Then this is also important.
And that occurs when the cell becomes drained or depleted in fatty acids, thus allowing, now we can use some carbohydrate that might be excess floating around in our blood and get that dealt with. Now that can be of utility. What's your point? This is how it's supposed to work.
Have to stop the fatty acid oxidation, as we talked about, because if you are still burning fats and you're still producing a higher amount of FADH2 in ratio to NADH compared to what you do with carbohydrate oxidation, you still get inhibition of these different enzymes because you don't have enough NAD+, you don't have enough of the empty battery.
It's almost like that's the way it's supposed to work. Because when the fat oxidation slows down, the production of FADH2 reduces, the NAD to FAD ratio normalizes, the three enzymes that are blockaded in the tricarboxylic acid cycle are unblockaded, and flow starts to go through a different pathway progressively. Goodness gracious, it all works. Fantastic.
For things to work effectively. So the insulin's main job is actually to just stop fatty acid oxidation.
No, it's not. Absolute fucking rubbish.
And then allow carbohydrate oxidation to come in.
Absolute fucking rubbish.
And work effectively. So I think you have to understand insulin in this circumstance.
But you don't know, boy, clearly.
To see how things are moving effectively. And again, we don't have the graphic.
Begging the question fallacy once again. Burning a bunch of carbohydrates is effective, apparently. And not doing so is ineffective and is a misfunctioning or a dysfunction in some way, according to this fucking arrogant cunt here. No, it isn't.
Up here, but once the carbs start coming in, the fat stops being oxidized. We shift that ratio. We get the higher NAD+ levels.
What is your fucking point, boy?
Better ratio NAD+ NADH. You have a decreased buildup of acetyl CoA because things start to flow through the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle, a little bit better, and then PDH starts getting
better. That's a value judgment statement, dickhead.
Activated as well, which allows for pyruvate to come into the Krebs cycle and be
No, still. Pyruvate never enters the Krebs cycle. Acetyl coenzyme A does.
Pyruvate's the end product of glycolysis, and then move into the electron transport chain and create the NADH that moves the electron transport chain to get converted into ATP. So this full, you have the insulin signaling, shuts down the fatty acid.
So what we're saying, boys and girls, in short, is that there are two fuels that the human body is able to oxidize for energy: fats and carbohydrates. Also, sure, we can deaminate and use protein, and sure, absolutely, alcohol can go through there in a different pathway slightly as well, whatever. The main two fuels are fat and carbohydrates. Mitochondria tend to want to continue doing what they are doing until a force powerful enough to change their course is applied. That force is the availability of substrates in the cytosol and outside of the cytosol in the extracellular space. There is a system in play that works absolutely perfectly to manage and moderate the fuel mix. We parsimoniously refer to it as the Randle Cycle. It indicates that in the case of a lot of free fatty acid being oxidized, carbohydrates are not required and they are contraindicated. They should not be taken in for that reason. Simple as that. There is nothing more nuanced than that than you really need to understand, except that these imbeciles here mindlessly waffling on about aspects of it, parts of it, without the first notion of how the thing works integratively, holistically, in order to protect the cells from damage that they would experience were glucose allowed to manage its own entry according to its own concentration gradient. You've just got to be a bit more discerning who you listen to, folks. Those of you that listen to these two fucking idiots. Seriously, they will lead you up the garden path. They make up shit, they make up problems that do not exist, and confidently state to you without the slightest air of irony that these problems exist, without the slightest evidence that they do. They say this is preferable to that because of X, Y, or Z, based on absolute fallacies, falsehoods, and misinterpretations of the objective reality in which we find ourselves. They are arrogant beyond belief, stupid and ill-educated in equal measure, and offensive as fuck for those reasons. I knew I wasn't going to get through all of this. That's enough, more than enough, for people to understand how poor these boys' interpretation of this entire thing is. They have no fucking idea how the thing works. All they know is what various different cogs within it look like a bit, without understanding how those cogs interact in order to produce a working gearbox. Okay? Thanks for sitting through this 2-hour expose on these fucking imbeciles. Join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, because it does not look like slowing down anytime soon, does it? No. See you then.